My name is Kylie, and I am 34 years old. Right now, I am standing in the bathroom of a five-star hotel, staring at my reflection in the mirror. In my trembling hand is a place card with words that cut deeper than any knife. Tonight is my husband's company gala. I spent 3 months preparing for this moment. They think I am just a pathetic housewife. They have no idea that I hold something that could bring this entire company to its knees. Before I begin this story, I would love to know where you are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. If you have ever been underestimated by the very people who should have loved you, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Now let me take you back to the beginning, to a time when I believed in love and loyalty, and in the man who promised to cherish me forever. Let me tell you who I was before everything fell apart. I graduated from the Wharton School of Business, finishing in the top 5% of my class. For 7 years, I worked as a senior financial analyst at one of the most prestigious investment firms in Manhattan. My job was to dig through numbers to find the inconsistencies that others missed, to spot the red flags hidden between the lines of quarterly reports. I was good at it, really good. My colleagues used to joke that I could smell fraud from 3 balance sheets away. I loved my work. There was something deeply satisfying about uncovering the truth about protecting investors from companies that tried to deceive them. Every morning I woke up excited to go to the office. Every evening I came home fulfilled. I had built something meaningful with my own hands, my own mind, my own determination. Then I met Derek. It was 8 years ago at a networking event in Chicago. I was there representing my firm, and he was a mid-level manager at Hartwell Industries, a major technology corporation. I noticed him across the room because he was laughing at something genuinely laughing, not the fake corporate chuckle that fills those events. When our eyes met, he walked straight over to me. We talked for hours that night. He asked about my work, and he actually listened. He wanted to know how I analyzed companies, what made me passionate about finance, what my dreams were for the future. Most men at those events wanted to talk about themselves. Derek wanted to know about me. He was charming without being arrogant, ambitious without being cutthroat. He told me about growing up in a small town in Ohio, about being the first person in his family to graduate college, about his determination to build a better life. I admired his drive. I believed in his character. We started dating long distance. Chicago to New York is not easy, but we made it work. Weekend flights, late-night phone calls, handwritten letters that he would mail just because he knew I loved getting real mail. He made me feel seen, valued, treasured. After 2 years, Derek proposed on a snowy evening in Central Park. I said yes without hesitation. We got married 3 months later in a small ceremony with close friends and family. It was perfect. He was perfect. The early years of our marriage were everything I had hoped for. Derek got promoted and we moved to Boston for his new position. We bought a beautiful house in the suburbs with a garden where I planted roses. On weekends, we would cook together, trying new recipes, making a mess of the kitchen, laughing at our failures. He would proudly introduce me to his colleagues as his brilliant wife, the financial analyst who could outsmart anyone in the room. I felt like I had it all: career, love, partnership, a future full of possibility. Then 3 years ago, everything began to shift. Derek was appointed Vice President of Operations at Hartwell Industries. It was a massive promotion, the kind of opportunity that comes once in a lifetime. He was working longer hours, traveling more, carrying more stress. One evening over dinner, he brought up an idea. "What if you took some time off?" he suggested. "You have been working so hard for so long. Maybe this is a good time to step back, relax, focus on us. We could even start thinking about having children." I hesitated. My career was important to me. My identity was wrapped up in being a professional, an expert, someone who contributed to the world through her skills. But Derek made it sound so reasonable. He talked about how we had enough money now, how I deserved a break, how our future family would need my attention. I loved him. I trusted him. So I agreed. I resigned from my position, and suddenly, for the first time in my adult life, I was not working. At first, it felt like a vacation. I read books I had been meaning to read for years. I redecorated parts of the house. I learned to make homemade pasta. But slowly an emptiness crept in. I missed the challenge, the purpose, the sense of accomplishment that came from doing something meaningful. I tried to stay connected to my field. I followed the markets from home, managed our personal investments, kept up with industry news. But it was not the same. I was no longer a financial analyst. I was just Derek's wife. And Derek started changing too. He stopped asking about my day. When I tried to discuss something I had read about the economy, he would dismiss me with a wave of his hand. Too complicated, he would say. You would not understand the corporate side of things. I reminded him that I had spent 7 years understanding exactly those things, but he just laughed it off. One night he came home late, smelling faintly of perfume. When I asked where he had been, he said he had dinner with his team. Then, as he was falling asleep, he murmured a name I had never heard before. Victoria. I asked him about it the next morning. He said Victoria was his new boss, the CEO who had just been appointed. Nothing to worry about, just work. But something in my gut told me to pay attention. Victoria Sterling took over as CEO of Hartwell Industries about a year before that night at the Gala. She was 42 years old with dark brown hair, always styled perfectly designer clothes that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and a way of speaking that made everyone around her feel slightly inadequate. Business magazines called her a visionary. Employees called her ruthless behind closed doors. Derek called her brilliant. He started mentioning her constantly. Victoria thinks we should restructure the marketing division. Victoria has this amazing strategy for the Asian markets. Victoria said my presentation was the best she has seen in years. Her name became a fixture in our home, an invisible presence at our dinner table. I tried to be supportive. I told myself that admiring a talented boss was normal. I reminded myself that Derek was ambitious, that he naturally gravitated toward successful people. But the admiration seemed to cross a line that I could not quite define. Derek began changing the way he dressed. He bought new suits more expensive than anything he had owned before because Victoria appreciated good tailoring. He started using words and phrases that did not sound like him, corporate jargon that felt rehearsed. He was becoming someone else, someone shaped by her influence. 6 months before the gala, I attended the company Christmas party. It was my first time meeting Victoria in person. Derek had been talking about her for months, and I was curious, maybe even a little eager to see this woman who had captured so much of my husband's attention. When we arrived, Derek immediately scanned the room for her. He found her near this bar, surrounded by executives hanging on her every word. He practically dragged me over. "Victoria," he said, his voice oddly formal, "I would like you to meet someone." She turned, looked me up and down in one swift motion, and then asked a question that still echoes in my memory. "Who is this?" Not "who is your wife?" Not "nice to meet you." Just "who is this?" as if I were a random stranger who had wandered in off the street. Derek stumbled over his introduction. "This is Kylie, my wife," he said, and I heard the slight hesitation before the word wife. Victoria smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "Oh," she said, tilting her head. "She looks different than what I imagined." I did not know what she had imagined, or why she had imagined anything at all. But I felt the sting of her dismissal, the way she made me feel small without raising her voice or saying anything explicitly rude. The rest of the party was uncomfortable. Victoria kept pulling Derek into conversations that excluded me. Whenever I tried to join, she would steer the topic toward something I supposedly would not understand. Internal company politics, technical details, things that wives do not need to worry about. I went home that night feeling like a stranger in my own marriage. After the Christmas party, things got worse. Derek started receiving phone calls late at night. At first it was 10 o'clock, then 11, then midnight. Every time he would step into another room, speak in hushed tones, and come back saying it was urgent work. One night, I saw a text message pop up on his phone screen. He had left it on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower. Tonight was wonderful. V. My heart stopped. I picked up the phone, hands shaking, and looked at the conversation. Most of it had been deleted, but those 3 words remained. When he came out of the shower, I asked him about it. I tried to keep my voice calm to give him a chance to explain. He laughed. That was just Victoria congratulating me on my presentation. We closed a big deal today. She was being appreciative. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But appreciative bosses do not sign their messages with just their initial. Appreciative bosses do not text at midnight about how wonderful the evening was. Still, I stayed silent. I told myself I was overreacting. I told myself that accusing my husband without proof would destroy our marriage. So I swallowed my suspicions and tried to be a good wife. But the distance between us grew wider every day. Derek stopped eating dinner at home. He said he had too many work events, too many team meetings that ran late. When I cooked his favorite meals, he would arrive after I had already put the food away, saying he had grabbed something at the office. When I suggested a weekend trip to reconnect, he said he was too busy. I started feeling invisible in my own home. I would speak, and he would not hear me. I would reach for his hand, and he would pull away. I would try to talk about our future, about the children we had discussed, and he would change the subject. 3 months before the gala, there was another company gathering, a summer picnic for employees and their families. I wore a yellow sundress that Derek had once said he loved. I spent extra time on my hair, my makeup, hoping that maybe if I looked pretty enough, he would remember why he had chosen me. Victoria was there, of course. She spotted us immediately and walked over her heels, somehow not sinking into the grass. "Kylie," she said loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "tell me, what do you do for work these days? Or do you just stay home waiting for Derek to finish supporting you?" The people around us laughed, not polite laughter, but genuine amusement at my expense. I felt my face flush. "I am taking a break from my career," I managed to say. "I used to work in financial analysis." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Used to? Interesting." She turned to Derek. "You really should find yourself a wife who contributes something. Do you not think Derek did not defend me?" He smiled uncomfortably and said nothing. That night I cried in our bathroom with the door locked and the water running so he would not hear. I cried for the woman I used to be, for the marriage I thought I had, for the future that seemed to be slipping away. But somewhere in those tears, something else started to grow. Not despair, determination. I could not shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong, and not just in my marriage. Derek had changed so dramatically under Victoria's influence. The late nights, the secrecy, the sudden devotion to a company that had seemed like just a job a few years ago. My analytical mind started wondering if there was more to the story than a simple affair. 1 month after that humiliating picnic, I decided to do what I did best. I started investigating. I began with publicly available information, annual reports, SEC filings, press releases. Hartwell Industries was a large technology company publicly traded with thousands of shareholders who trusted the leadership to be honest about the company's performance. At first, everything looked normal. Revenue was growing, profits were increasing. The stock price had been climbing steadily since Victoria took over. On paper, she was doing an excellent job. But then I started noticing small discrepancies. The reported revenue did not quite match the cash flow statements. There were unusual transactions with subsidiary companies in the Cayman Islands and Luxembourg. The accounts receivable numbers seemed inflated compared to industry standards. Little things that most people would overlook, but that stood out to someone with my training. I dug deeper. I spent hours in my small home office, surrounded by printouts and spreadsheets comparing numbers across multiple quarters. I pulled historical data going back 3 years before Victoria's tenure and compared it to the current figures. The pattern became clear. Since Victoria had taken over the company, had been systematically overstating its profits. They were booking revenue that did not actually exist, using complex transactions with shell companies to create the illusion of growth. It was textbook accounting fraud, the kind that could fool casual observers, but would eventually collapse under its own weight. My hands trembled as I realized what I had found. This was not just corporate misconduct. This was a scheme worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Investors were being deceived, shareholders were being robbed, and the stock price was artificially inflated based on lies. But who was behind it? Was it just Victoria, or was Derek involved too? I needed more evidence, something beyond public filings. So I reached out to an old colleague from my Manhattan days, someone who still had connections in the financial investigation world. I asked him hypothetically, of course, how someone might access internal communications from a company suspected of fraud. A week later, he sent me an encrypted file. No questions asked. Inside were leaked emails from Hartwell's internal server emails that had been flagged by a whistleblower who was too afraid to come forward publicly. What I found in those emails broke my heart completely. Derek was not just aware of the fraud. He was an active participant. There were messages between him and Victoria discussing how to hide certain transactions. There were documents he had signed off on approving fake invoices from non-existent vendors. There were promises from Victoria that once she consolidated her power, Derek would be promoted to Chief Operating Officer as a reward for his loyalty and his silence. And then there were the other emails, the personal ones. "I miss you," Victoria had written. "Tonight felt like the beginning of something real." "It is real," Derek had replied. "I have never felt this way about anyone, not even close." I sat in my office chair staring at those words until my vision blurred with tears. My husband was not only cheating on me, he was not only helping to defraud thousands of innocent investors, he was also so blinded by this woman that he had completely forgotten the vows he made to me, the life we built together, the person he used to be. For a moment I considered confronting him immediately. I imagined storming into the living room, throwing the evidence in his face, watching his expression crumble. It would have been satisfying in a primal way, but I am not an impulsive person. I am an analyst. I think strategically. So instead of reacting emotionally, I made a plan. First, I contacted a lawyer who specialized in securities fraud. I met with her in secret, explained what I had found, and asked about the process for reporting to the SEC. She confirmed that I could file as an anonymous whistleblower, and that if my information led to successful enforcement action, I might even be entitled to a portion of the recovered funds under the SEC's whistleblower program. I did not care about the money, but I did care about justice. Second, I prepared for divorce. I gathered financial documents, made copies of everything important, and opened a separate bank account in my name only. I wanted to make sure that when the time came, I would be protected. Third, and this was the part that required the most careful thought, I used my knowledge of the markets to make an investment. I knew that once the SEC investigation became public, Hartwell's stock would collapse. So I used my personal savings to buy put options contracts that would increase in value as the stock price fell. It was not insider trading because I was not an employee of the company and had no fiduciary duty to keep the information secret. I was simply an outside observer who had done her research. Finally, I waited. I knew the SEC would take time to act. These investigations move slowly, carefully building cases that can withstand legal challenges. But I also knew that the Gala was coming up, the annual event where Hartwell celebrated its leadership and its successes. I decided that the Gala would be my moment, not for revenge exactly. Revenge implies anger and hatred, and while I felt those things, they were not what drove me. What drove me was something deeper. I wanted to reclaim my dignity. I wanted to show them, all of them, that I was not the pathetic nobody they thought I was. I wanted to walk out of that ballroom with my head held high, knowing that the truth would soon come to light. I bought a beautiful red dress with my own money I had earned and saved during my years as a professional. I practiced staying calm in the mirror, breathing through the anxiety, preparing myself for whatever cruelty they might throw at me. The night before the Gala, I received confirmation from my lawyer. The SEC would announce its investigation the following morning. The timing was perfect. I barely slept that night. I lay in bed next to Derek, listening to his breathing, thinking about all the years we had spent together. The love that had once seemed so real, the future we had imagined, all of it built on lies. When morning came, I got up and started getting ready for the most important evening of my life. The afternoon of the Gala, I spent nearly 3 hours preparing. I took a long bath, trying to calm my nerves. I applied my makeup carefully, taking my time with each step. I styled my hair in loose waves that fell past my shoulders. When I finally slipped into my red dress, I barely recognized the woman looking back at me in the mirror. She looked confident, powerful, ready. Derek came home from work around 5 o'clock to change. He walked into the bedroom, glanced at me, and frowned. "You are wearing that?" he asked. "Is it not a bit much?" I smiled without answering. I had learned months ago that my words meant nothing to him anymore. On the drive to the hotel, Derek texted constantly, chuckling at his phone screen. I knew who he was talking to. I said nothing. I watched the city lights pass by the window and thought about everything that was about to happen. The Gala was held at the Grand Meridian Hotel, one of the most luxurious venues in the city. When we arrived, I stepped out of the car and looked up at the glittering entrance. Crystal chandeliers visible through the windows. Valets in crisp uniforms, women in evening gowns, and men in tailored tuxedos streaming through the doors. Inside the ballroom was even more impressive. Enormous flower arrangements of white roses and orchids decorated every table. A string quartet played classical music in the corner. Waiters glided through the crowd carrying trays of champagne and canapes. There must have been 300 guests, all of them laughing and networking, as if the world was perfect. Derek spotted Victoria almost immediately. She was standing near the center of the room, surrounded by admirers, wearing a black dress that probably cost more than my first car. The moment she saw him, her face lit up with a smile that made my stomach turn. "I will be right back," Derek said, not even looking at me. He walked toward her, leaving me alone. I stood there for a moment watching my husband greet his lover in front of hundreds of people. Nobody seemed to notice. Or maybe they did notice and simply did not care. I decided to find my assigned seat. I weaved through the crowd, searching for my name on the place cards arranged on the tables near the back of the room. Derek, of course, was seated at the VIP table near the stage right next to Victoria. I was relegated to a table in the far corner. When I finally found my place card, I froze. The card did not say Kylie Morrison. It said, "Pathetic gold digger nobody." I picked it up, holding it between my fingers, reading those words over and over. Someone had taken the time to print this to humiliate me intentionally. Someone wanted me to know exactly how little I mattered in their eyes. I heard laughter behind me. I turned to see a group of Derek's colleagues standing nearby watching me. Among them was a woman named Brenda, Victoria's personal assistant, who was covering her mouth with her hand but could not hide her amusement. "Oh my God," she said loudly. "She actually found it." The others burst into open laughter. A man I vaguely recognized from previous events raised his glass as if toasting my humiliation. Another woman pulled out her phone, presumably to take a picture. Then Victoria appeared. She walked through the group, which parted for her like water, and stopped directly in front of me. Her smile was cold, triumphant. "Kylie," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Still clinging to him. "Everyone here knows the truth, sweetheart. Derek has been done with you for a long time." My grip on the place card tightened. "Do you know what your problem is?" Victoria continued, apparently enjoying herself. "You thought you could hold on to a successful man just by existing. No career, no ambition, no value. You are nothing but a gold digger who got lucky for a while, and now your luck has run out." The people around her nodded in agreement. Someone muttered something about how Derek deserved better. Someone else laughed again. I looked past Victoria and saw Derek standing at the edge of the group. He was watching the scene unfold. Our eyes met. He did not say a word. He did not tell them to stop. He did not defend me. Instead, he smiled slightly, as if he found the whole thing mildly entertaining. That smile hurt more than the place card, more than Victoria's words, more than all the cruel laughter combined. Because in that moment, I saw the truth clearly. The man I had married was gone. Maybe he had never existed at all. I took a deep breath. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady. "All of you. Thank you for showing me exactly who you are. I will remember this night." Victoria looked confused by my calmness. She had expected tears, perhaps, or angry screaming, something she could use to prove that I was the hysterical, unstable wife she had painted me as. But I gave her nothing. I turned and walked toward the exit. I moved through the crowd with my head held high, not rushing, not fleeing, just leaving. That was when I saw him. Jonathan Hartwell, the founder and chairman of the board, was standing near the entrance. He was 72 years old, white-haired, distinguished. He had stepped back from day-to-day operations 3 years ago, but still attended major company events. Unlike Victoria, he had built this company from nothing. He had earned his success honestly. He was standing alone, looking out at the room with an expression I recognized. It was the look of someone who senses that something is wrong, but cannot quite identify what. I walked over to him. "Mr. Hartwell," I said softly. "Good evening." He turned to me with polite curiosity. "Good evening," he replied. "You are Derek Morrison's wife, correct, Kylie?" "Yes," I said. "I am surprised you remember." He smiled gently. "I make it a point to remember names. It is the foundation of good business. Are you enjoying the gala?" I paused, considering my next words carefully. Mr. Hartwell, I said, lowering my voice so only he could hear. I think you should check your stock price tomorrow morning, and you might want to look closely at who has been running your company. He frowned, his expression shifting from polite to concerned. What do you mean? I reached into my clutch and pulled out a small envelope I had prepared earlier. Inside was a summary of everything I had found. The fraudulent transactions, the fake revenue, the shell companies, everything. The evidence is all here, I said, pressing the envelope into his hand. The SEC is announcing an investigation tomorrow at 6 a.m. I wanted you to know before it becomes public. Jonathan Hartwell looked at the envelope, then at me. His eyes were sharp despite his age, the eyes of a man who had built an empire and could still recognize a threat when he saw one. How do you know this? He asked. Because I used to be a financial analyst, I said. One of the best. And I know fraud when I see it. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Thank you, he said quietly. I will not forget this. I nodded back and walked out of the ballroom, leaving behind the laughter, the cruelty, and the man who had promised to love me forever. Outside the hotel, the night air was cool against my skin. I raised my hand to hail a taxi, and within moments, one pulled up to the curb. I slid into the back seat, gave the driver my address, and watched the Grand Meridian Hotel disappear through the rear window. My phone buzzed. A text message from my lawyer. Everything is confirmed. Announcement goes live at 6 a.m. sharp. You did the right thing. I closed my eyes and leaned my head back against the seat. It was strange what I felt in that moment. I had expected triumph or at least satisfaction, but mostly I just felt tired and empty and sad. The taxi wound through the city streets, passing couples walking hand in hand, families heading home after dinner, people living their ordinary lives. I wondered how many of them had secrets, how many marriages looked perfect from the outside but were rotting from within, how many people smiled through their pain because they did not know what else to do. When I got home, I changed out of my red dress and into comfortable clothes. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in the living room surrounded by the artifacts of my marriage. Wedding photos on the mantel, a throw blanket we had bought together on a trip to Vermont, books Derek had given me for birthdays and anniversaries inscribed with loving messages that now felt like lies. I did not cry. I had done my crying months ago alone in bathrooms and cars and empty rooms. Now there was just this quiet waiting, this calm before the storm. Around 2 a.m, I must have dozed off on the couch. I woke to the sound of my phone ringing. It was a number I did not recognize. I answered anyway. Mrs. Morrison, a voice said. This is Thomas Chen from the SEC Office of Enforcement. I apologize for calling at this hour, but I wanted to thank you personally. Your information has been invaluable. The investigation is proceeding faster than we anticipated, thanks to the documentation you provided. I am glad I could help, I said. I should also mention, he continued, that based on preliminary findings, we believe there will be significant penalties and restitution. As a whistleblower, you will be entitled to a portion of any recovered funds. We are talking potentially several $1 million. I thanked him and ended the call. The money was never my motivation. Justice was. Dignity was. But I would be lying if I said the thought of financial independence did not bring some comfort. I stayed awake after that, watching the clock tick toward morning. At 5:30, I turned on the television and tuned to the financial news channel. At exactly 6 o'clock, the anchor's expression turned serious. Breaking news this morning, she said. The Securities and Exchange Commission has announced a formal investigation into Hartwell Industries, alleging widespread accounting fraud orchestrated by senior leadership. The company's stock has already plummeted 30% in pre-market trading, with analysts predicting further losses as details emerge. The screen filled with images of Hartwell's headquarters, of Victoria Sterling's corporate headshot, of stock charts plunging downward. I watched without blinking. Somewhere across the city, Derek was probably waking up to the worst day of his life. Victoria was probably realizing that her empire of lies was crumbling. And all those colleagues who had laughed at me just hours ago were probably wondering how their careers would survive the scandal. Around 7 o'clock, I heard keys in the front door. Derek burst in, his face pale, his tie loosened, his whole appearance disheveled in a way I had never seen before. "What did you do?" he shouted. "Do you have any idea what you have done?" I stood up calmly. What I did was tell the truth. He crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping inches from my face. You destroyed everything. My career, my future, everything I worked for. No, I said, my voice steady. You destroyed everything. You chose to participate in fraud. You chose to help Victoria cook the books. You chose to betray me, to laugh at me, to let them call me a pathetic nobody. I just made sure the truth came to light. Derek's face contorted with rage, then confusion, then something that might have been fear. How do you even know about the financials? You are just a housewife. I smiled at that, a real smile, maybe the first genuine smile I had worn in months. I was never just a housewife, I said. I was a financial analyst, top of my class at Wharton, 7 years at one of the best firms in New York. You forgot who I was because it was convenient for you to forget, but I never forgot. I walked to the hallway table where I had left a folder the night before. Inside was the divorce petition already signed and dated. This is for you, I said, handing it to him. I am filing for divorce. My lawyer will be in touch about the details. Derek stared at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language. You cannot do this, he said weakly. We can work this out. Victoria meant nothing. It was just a mistake. Victoria is going to prison, I said. And based on what I found, you might be joining her. I suggest you get yourself a good criminal defense attorney. I turned and walked toward the bedroom to pack a bag. Behind me, I heard Derek sink onto the couch, the papers falling from his hands. I felt no satisfaction, no joy, only the quiet certainty that I had done what needed to be done. The days that followed were a whirlwind. The SEC investigation moved quickly, fueled by the evidence I had provided and the cooperation of other employees who came forward once they realized the ship was sinking. Within a week, the full scope of the fraud became public, hundreds of millions of dollars in fake revenue. Elaborate schemes involving shell companies across 3 continents, a network of lies that had propped up Hartwell's stock price for years. Victoria Sterling was arrested at her home on a Tuesday morning. I watched the footage on the news, saw her being led out in handcuffs, her perfectly styled hair disheveled, her designer clothes wrinkled. She tried to maintain her composure, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She was charged with securities fraud, wire fraud conspiracy, and a dozen other counts. The prosecutors said she could face up to 25 years in prison. Derek was named as an unindicted co-conspirator. He was fired from Hartwell immediately, his name permanently associated with one of the biggest corporate scandals in recent memory. He was banned from working in any publicly traded company. The career he had sacrificed our marriage for was over. Meanwhile, my put options performed exactly as I had anticipated. As Hartwell's stock collapsed, losing nearly 60% of its value in the first 2 weeks, my investment multiplied. By the time I closed my positions, I had made nearly $2 million. More importantly, the SEC's whistleblower program awarded me an additional sum based on the penalties recovered from the company. My lawyer called with the news, her voice barely containing her excitement. Combined with my investment returns, I was financially independent. I would never need to depend on anyone again. The people who had laughed at me at the gala were suddenly very interested in apologizing. Brenda, Victoria's assistant, sent me a long email expressing her deep regret for her behavior. She claimed she had been pressured by Victoria, that she never really thought I was pathetic, that she hoped I could find it in my heart to forgive her. I did not respond. Others reached out too. Former colleagues of Derek who had witnessed my humiliation and done nothing. Executives who had smiled while Victoria tore me apart. People who suddenly remembered that I existed now that the power dynamics had shifted. I ignored them all. Their apologies meant nothing to me. They were sorry because they had been caught on the wrong side of history, not because they genuinely regretted what they had done. True remorse does not wait for consequences. The only communication that mattered came from Jonathan Hartwell. He called me personally a few weeks after the initial scandal broke. His voice sounded older than I remembered, weighted with disappointment. "I wanted to thank you again," he said. "What you did took tremendous courage. Because of you, the fraud was discovered before it could cause even more damage. You saved my company's remaining reputation, what little there is left of it." I appreciated his words, but I told him the truth. I did not do it for the company, I said. I did it because it was right. And honestly, I did it for myself too. They tried to make me feel worthless, and I needed to prove that I was not." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something I will never forget. "The people who try hardest to make others feel small are usually the ones who are most afraid of their own inadequacy. Victoria feared anyone who might see through her. That is why she targeted you. She could sense that you were different, that you had the intelligence to expose her. Her cruelty was a form of preemptive defense. I thanked him for his insight and wished him well with the company's restructuring. After I hung up, I sat with his words for a long time. They helped me understand something I had struggled with. Victoria's hatred was never really about me. It was about her own insecurity, her own fear of being discovered. I was just a convenient target. Understanding that did not erase the pain, but it did make it easier to let go. The first few months after everything fell apart were harder than I expected. You would think that winning would feel good, that watching the people who hurt you face consequences would bring peace, and in some ways it did. But victory does not heal wounds. It just gives you space to notice them. I could not sleep well. I would lie awake at night replaying memories. Not the bad ones, surprisingly, but the good ones. Derek's face when he proposed. Our wedding day. The early years when we were happy, or at least when I believed we were happy. I mourned the loss of a future that would never exist, children we would never have, anniversaries we would never celebrate. Some nights I questioned myself. Had I done the right thing? Could I have handled it differently? Was there any universe where my marriage could have been saved? But in the morning light, I always came back to the same conclusion. Derek made his choices. He chose fraud. He chose Victoria. He chose to stand silently while I was humiliated. My only choice was whether to remain a victim or to reclaim my agency. I chose the latter. I started seeing a therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Patricia Reeves, who specialized in helping people through major life transitions. She helped me understand that losing my career had been more traumatic than I realized at the time. When I gave up my job for Derek, I gave up more than a paycheck. I gave up my identity, my sense of purpose, my confidence. No wonder Victoria's attacks hurt so much, Dr. Reeves observed. You had already internalized the belief that you were not enough without your professional achievements. She just exploited a wound that was already there. That insight changed everything. I realized that my healing was not just about recovering from Derek's betrayal. It was about rediscovering who I was independent of any relationship or job title. I started small. I reconnected with old friends I had neglected during my marriage. I took long walks in the park, remembering what it felt like to enjoy simple pleasures without feeling guilty about not being productive. I read books that had nothing to do with finance novels that transported me to different worlds and reminded me why I used to love reading. Slowly, I began to feel like myself again. 6 months after the gala, I received an unexpected phone call from a headhunter. "Miss Morrison," he said, "my name is Robert Callahan. I represent Lighthouse Capital Partners. We have been following the Hartwell case closely, and your role in uncovering the fraud has caught our attention. We would like to discuss a potential opportunity." Lighthouse Capital was one of the most respected investment firms in the country. Their reputation was built on integrity and rigorous analysis, exactly the kind of place where I had always dreamed of working. I met with them the following week. The interview lasted 4 hours, covering everything from technical analysis to ethical philosophy. At the end, they offered me a position as a senior director, 2 levels above where I had been before I quit to become Derek's supportive wife. I accepted. Walking into that office on my first day felt like coming home. The hum of activity, the glow of computer screens displaying market data, the energy of people who loved uncovering the truth hidden in numbers. This was where I belonged. I threw myself into the work with a passion I had forgotten I possessed. My colleagues were brilliant and respectful. They valued my insights and welcomed my contributions. Nobody cared that I had been through a scandal. They only cared about the quality of my analysis. Among my new colleagues was a woman named Amanda, a senior compliance officer with a sharp wit and a generous heart. We became fast friends, bonding over long lunches and after-work drinks. She was the first person in years who wanted to know the real me, not the version I performed for others. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had genuine connection. A year after the gala, I was walking down a street in the financial district when I saw a familiar figure on the opposite sidewalk. Derek. He looked different, thinner, tired. His clothes, once so carefully chosen to impress Victoria, were now rumpled and worn. He was carrying a folder and walking with the defeated posture of someone who had lost everything. Our eyes met. For a moment we just stood there, separated by a river of pedestrians. Then he crossed the street and approached me. "Kylie," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I have been hoping I would run into you." I waited. "I know I have no right to ask for anything," he continued, "but I need you to know that I am sorry, not just for the affair or the fraud, but for everything. For making you feel small, for forgetting who you were, for letting them hurt you." I studied his face. He looked sincere. Maybe he was. People can change, especially when they lose everything. "I appreciate you saying that," I said carefully. "But Derek, I did not need your apology to move on. I have already forgiven you." His eyes widened with surprise. "You have?" "Yes," I said. "Not because you deserve it, but because I do." Holding on to anger was poisoning me, so I let it go. "Not for you, for myself." He nodded slowly, absorbing my words. "I hope you find peace." I continued. "I really do. But we are done. There is nothing between us anymore. I wish you well, but I need you to stay out of my life." He opened his mouth to say something more, then closed it. Finally, he just nodded. "Goodbye, Kylie," he said. "Goodbye, Derek," I replied. I turned and walked away. I did not look back. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt truly free. It has been 2 years since that night at the Gala. I am sitting on the balcony of my new apartment, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. It is a small place, nothing extravagant, but it is mine. I chose every piece of furniture, every painting on the wall, every plant on the windowsill. It reflects who I am, not who someone else wanted me to be. My career has flourished beyond anything I imagined. Last month, I was promoted to partner at Lighthouse Capital. I now lead a team of analysts mentoring young professionals who remind me of myself 10 years ago. I tell them to always trust their instincts, to never be afraid of uncomfortable truths, to remember that their value comes from within, not from external validation. I still think about what happened sometimes, not with bitterness, but with a kind of distant wonder. How different my life would be if I had never discovered the fraud, if I had stayed silent, if I had accepted the role of pathetic nobody that they tried to assign me. But I did not accept it. That is the thing. They underestimated me because it was convenient for them to see me as insignificant. They laughed at me because mocking others made them feel powerful. They thought my silence was weakness when it was actually strategy. I learned so much from that experience. I learned that the people who try to diminish you often do so because they sense something threatening in your strength. I learned that losing everything can be the beginning of finding yourself. I learned that revenge is not as satisfying as simply living well and letting karma do its work. Most importantly, I learned that I was never a pathetic nobody. I was always intelligent, capable, and valuable. I just needed to remember it. Victoria is still in prison. She was sentenced to 18 years. I read about it in the news but felt nothing. She is irrelevant to my life now. Derek, from what I hear, moved to a small town somewhere in the Midwest. He works at a local accounting firm, a far cry from the executive suite he once dreamed of. I hope he has found some peace, some way to rebuild. Not because I care about him specifically, but because I believe everyone deserves a chance at redemption. As for me, I do not know what the future holds. Maybe I will fall in love again someday. Maybe I will remain single and discover that solitude can be its own kind of contentment. Maybe I will start a business, write a book, travel the world. The possibilities feel endless in a way they never did before. What I know for certain is this: I will never again define myself through someone else's eyes. I will never again sacrifice my identity for the comfort of another person. I will never again stay silent when I should speak or shrink when I should stand tall. They called me a pathetic gold digger nobody. I turned out to be the one who brought them all down. And now, sitting on my balcony watching the last light of day fade into evening, I smile. Because the best revenge is not destruction. It is transformation. It is becoming the person you were always meant to be, despite every obstacle placed in your path. So if you are watching this, and you have ever been made to feel small, if you have ever been laughed at or dismissed or underestimated, let me tell you something. They do not get to decide who you are. Only you have that power. Use it. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who should have believed in you? How did you prove them wrong? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might inspire someone else who is going through the same thing. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. It helps more people find this channel and hear these messages. And if you have not already, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Do not forget to share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Sometimes the right story at the right time can change everything. Thank you so much for watching, for listening, and for being part of this community. I wish you strength in your struggles, courage in your choices, and the unwavering belief that you are worth more than anyone else's opinion of you. Until next time, take care of yourself. You deserve it.